Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Gladden. I'm a USA Today bestselling author with over 30 published novels and a high school English teacher. And on this week's episode, I am excited to have an Arizona author. I'm excited to have Sydney Graves is the pen name, and we'll be also talking about her books under her name, Kate Christensen, as well. We'll have both of those listed, and we may venture into both realms of her writing because they are different. And we're going to talk about that jump in genres as well. But before we get into all of that, Kate/Sydney, go ahead and introduce yourself to our listeners.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me, Sheree. I'm Arizona native. I grew up in Phoenix and Tempe, and we moved up to Jerome, which is a ghost town in the north of Arizona. I now live in Taos, New Mexico, so I'm actually a New Mexico writer, but I think of myself in terms of this detective series that I'm writing as an Arizona writer, so you're right. I'm writing a new detective series. I've just published the first one, The Arizona Triangle, under a pseudonym, Sydney Graves, and all my other novels are under my own name, which is Kate Christensen. And the pseudonym is just because it's fun. I just like the cloak and dagger aspect of writing a different genre under a different name.
Well, and that's something that it's a really personal decision, and I've talked to various authors on just the benefits of using a pen name, of not using it, whether to split genres between different pen names. It can get a little bit complicated trying to make that decision.
Yeah. This book, The Arizona Triangle, it's my first Jo Balin detective novel. She's my female detective based in Tucson. I wrote it during COVID, during lockdown, in a farmhouse in New Hampshire, and I had sprained my ankle. It was winter. It was me and my husband and our two dogs, and basically didn't see anyone else for over a year. And I was working on my novel, Welcome Home Stranger, which is my last literary novel, which came out over a year ago, and it wasn't working. And I was beating my head against it in this cold, dreary, sort of dark, snowy landscape. And I looked out the window and I thought, I miss Arizona. And then I looked out the window some more and I thought, I want to write a detective novel, finally, after years and years of reading them and loving them, especially series, especially female detectives. And, all art is imitative. So for me, it was like eating a great meal and wanting to cook it myself. So I ventured into the detective genre as a palate cleanser, sort of as fun, as like an escape from the literary novel, which I finally did make work. And I think it was in no small part to switching genres. And sometimes putting something away that's not working and writing something else allows you to come back to the thing that isn't working and make it work. And in my case, I realized the problem was structural. I fixed it and on I went. But in the meantime, I realized this is the first book of a series. This is really exciting. And so the decision to write it under a different name was almost automatic. And deciding on a name was really fun. And picking a name that shared the initials with two of my favorite female detective writers, Sue Grafton and Sarah Gran, that seemed obvious, so it had to be SG. And then I wanted a sort of gender fluid name because my detective is queer and has a lot of masculine sort of qualities that she's very proud of. So I wanted my name to kind of reflect that. And then, of course, Graves is perfect for murder.
Absolutely. Well, I love the way you described kind of that working between the two. And I'm similar in that I always have multiple projects going on. And as soon as I get stuck on one, it's like, okay, time to go back to the other one. Your subconscious keeps working on whatever that problem is when you switch over to something else.
I know, it's amazing. So do you write under pseudonyms?
I have one just because it's like wildly different than what I wrote. 'Cause I started out writing YA, and this was not for teens, and I didn't want it to accidentally end up in the hand of teens. But most of my books are under just my regular name. And I write in way too many genres, but it was like, trying to manage all that social media for like 5 different pen names. That sounded awful.
No, it's not expedient, actually. It gets complicated. I'm going to stick to one pseudonym and one, I have a YA book coming out this fall, actually. And so I've also ventured into YA, and I'm finding it to be an amazing genre to work in. And I'm wondering, since you're such a pro at YA, if you find that not only do I feel like returning to my teenage self is healing in a weird way. I had a really hard adolescence, and writing about adolescence feels almost corrective. It's because a lot of YA is about girl power. and
Hmm.
how girls are able to use their power. And I think teenage girls are hungry for that. My book is about that. But anyway, it's not under a pseudonym.
Okay.
And I'm hoping my adult novels do not fall into teenage hands. I will just say.
Well, I think the way you have yours structured, like even on your website, and like it's clear what goes with which reader
Hmm.
group. So
Good.
I think you'll be pretty good there.
Okay.
But I think YA is such an interesting genre because there's so much in it that bridges that gap between childhood and adulthood, and it's so
Hmm.
formative for real
Hmm.
people, going through it. But there's so much that you can cover in YA in a different way than it's addressed in either children's literature or adult literature.
Hmm.
It makes it really unique and a lot of interesting problems that you encounter as a writer that you have to learn how to work around and fix and incorporate that don't come up in the same way, like parents. You know,
Yeah.
parents can be a
Yeah.
real problem in YA literature if you need the character to do things on their own and not rely on parents to fix things. And so you get a lot of like absent parents in YA, and
Hmm.
sometimes that's helpful, but then sometimes it's like, well, that's also just kind of taking the easy way out. How do I work with this when they actually do have parents that are in there? So I think it's kind of a fun puzzle to work in YA. It's been a while since I've written in YA, but it's one that I think it's really just fascinating to try if you've never tried it
Hmm.
before and just experience how different it is from writing in other genres. So I'm glad you went into that direction and got to experience that. That's really cool.
I am so glad. And so much of what you said resonates with me. The idea of you have to keep it fixated on the teenagers. Teens want to read
Hmm.
about teens, and that's the tricky thing. That's what my agent told me. My first draft had too many olds, as he
Mm.
called them. And he said, you have to get rid of a lot of these olds because, of course, as an old, I'm fascinated by olds.
Hmm.
So that was a whole shift in perspective. Like, no, this is a teenage world. And you're right, there
Hmm.
had, it always reminds me of the adult voices in Charlie Brown that are unintelligible, but they're very present.
Yeah.
And it's sort of like that.
Well, and that kind of leads us into talking about the Arizona Triangle because, while it is for adult readers, it deals with a lot of those adolescent years that have greatly impacted the characters in the
Hmm.
story. So, give us kind of a rundown of just what the book is about before we jump any deeper into questions.
Okay. Well, it starts out with my detective on a stakeout taking, run-of-the-mill sort of private eye pictures of a cheating spouse for her husband who wants custody of the kids. And as she's finishing up, she gets a call that ultimately what she finds out is that her estranged childhood best friend has gone missing. And they grew up in a town about an hour north of Tucson. And her friend's mother wants her to find the friend because she knows her. So she would have insight into where she might have gone or what might have happened to her. And Jo works for an all-female agency. Her boss tells her to take the case. In fact, she's already taken it and sends her up to Delphi, which is the town she grew up in, that night to get going on the case, which begins right away. And so she goes and talks to the mother. She's nosing around Rose's life. She has to face a lot of her own demons from adolescence. I think this is relevant because she's on the cusp of turning 40, which is a time, or it was for me and a lot of people I know, of reckoning with adolescence. Funnily, it was so interesting what happened to me in light of adolescence when I turned 40. I started turning over everything that happened in my teenage years. It's really important to understand adolescence so I could go into middle age. And so it's kind of what this novel is about. And I think that's a really astute question.
Well, I think that's very true. Of just, you hit that point where you really start thinking, I'm at this point in my life because why?
Hmm.
you know, was it the
Exactly.
people, the experiences, the location? So much goes into making a person. And as writers, we get to experience that with our characters and build them. And a lot of our own experiences or things that we've taken in over our lifetime, like, play into that. It's
Hmm.
complex.
Hmm.
It's complex doing it in a fictional setting. And then trying to understand that personally is
Hmm.
even harder because we can't look at it as objectively as we can our characters.
No, exactly. Exactly. I mean, I'm well past 40. So for me, it was like a way of revisiting that time in my life. And sort of, I like it because I want this to be a series and I wanted to introduce the reader to Jo in a really deep way. Like, you will know her demons, you know her past, you know her relationship with her mother, her dead father, sort of her ex-boyfriend, the way she discovered that she's queer, the sort of kind of relationship she has. They're all in the first book. And so I feel like having packed that all into book one, and by the way, I should also say that it gets really dark, and that felt necessary to what I had set up. But it's not a trigger warning. It's more of a sort of just a comment on what happens when you delve into that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, it's about the aftermath of trauma, really, and how it reverberates through families. And I think it's darker than murder almost. So now I forgot where I was going. But I'll write. It's about this, positioning this as the first book in a series. Now I feel free to write the second book, which I'm just starting. It's much more of a collaborative. She works with the other detective in her agency, Erin Yazzie, who is something of a kind of superwoman, stealth ninja, just like amazing person who Jo admires and wants to get closer to. And allowing this relationship to flower and allowing it to be a really professional case. I feel like you already know who Jo is if you read book one. And if you didn't, if you read book two, maybe you'll be curious to go back. And I'm feeling the building of a series and what that kind of looks like. I've never done this before. So I feel like you want to give enough. And Sue Grafton did this so brilliantly in the Alphabet series, which I've read 3 times, and which I look to as a blueprint for how to write a great series, multiple books. You sort of interweave personal stuff with detective stuff, and you keep it all going, sort of humming, and sometimes it comes to the forefront, and sometimes it's in the background. This is about a murdered immigration lawyer, so it's about immigration in Arizona, which is a complex and I think pretty timely subject.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of people have a lot of strong opinions on everything surrounding immigration. So it really offers up a lot of opportunities for really some deep layers of that discussion and perspectives on it.
Yeah,
So that sounds
yeah.
really interesting. You'll have to stay in contact. We can chat about it again
And
next time.
also about that, like you said, there's something about genre that allows for an exploration of issues that are different in just straight up literary adult detective fiction. I thought that was worth noting.
Definitely. Well, it's really interesting. I did a Great Courses Plus recently that was like 45 hours long as an audiobook, and it was on just like the history of mystery and suspense and thriller writing. And it was really fascinating because it went through just the early stages and how it's changed over the years. And it went into the different kind of subgenres that have come, especially when it comes to female detectives and different ethnicities and races and cultural groups that have kind of sectioned out their space within the mystery and suspense thriller conglomerate of genres. It's hard
Mm-hmm.
to like say that's one genre, but because there's so many
No, by
parts
now
of
it
it.
isn't. Yeah.
And it was really interesting to hear him discuss that, like how different aspects of society can be discussed and really like deeply investigated through mysteries in
Yep.
the victims and how their cases are handled to detectives who are in different subgroups within society. And it was really a lot of fun to listen to this class and realize this is one of the reasons that I think mystery is the usually consistently most popular genre in fiction, the
Mm-hmm.
highest
Mm-hmm.
selling, because I think it
Yep.
really gives so much space to so many different types of topics while being entertaining and having these plots that you have to think through and it gets your mind going, and a lot of just really great characters in fiction that you can follow for a good long time and not get bored of.
Totally. And another thing that I really love and have always loved about mysteries is that they are about murder, they are about really dark things, and they are about all kinds of societal issues, as you just said. And by the way, I want to know more about this course because, of course, I'm going to instantly go and take it. It sounds fascinating. But another thing I really love, and the real Arizona Triangle, is the murderer and the victim and the detective. And that's the classic triangle in a whodunit, in a sort of murder mystery. And it always, and I think another reason why people love them so much is that there's the promise of bringing order out of chaos at the end. And this isn't something that other genres offer as a matter of course, I don't think. I think detective novels are unique in this. And maybe rom-coms, I think that's the other one, but or romance and comedy, but which is like an ancient literary tradition that I also love. But I think that mysteries offer a detective who, no matter what the genre, no matter what if it's hard-boiled or noir or, you know, whatever the subgenre, wherever it's set, there's always a sense that we're going to know who did it at the end. That's the implicit pact that we make with our reader. And so you can settle in with a grisly Scandinavian noir that goes into I think those are the darkest books in existence.
Yeah.
And it goes into like bloody snow and like mangled bodies, like deserted farmhouses where unspeakable torture has taken place. But as the reader, I mean, it's sort of like reading those books about climbing Everest or like, you know, deep sea exploration. They're terrifying, but it's not you, and you're sitting in your armchair all warm with a cup of tea. But like with a detective novel, it offers that other layer, which is you're going to know who did it. And it is a sort of mental puzzle. And you can detach from the gore because there is the structure and there is the form of the genre itself that is the kind of container for the unspeakably horrible, horrific, you know, depths of evil of humanity, which is amazing. It's amazing that one book can do that, you know, not let alone an entire genre. But I do think the enduring popularity is that that's what we crave. It's like the satisfaction of a good children's story for adults. We crave the darkness and we crave the solution.
Well, I think there's so much about humanity that is really a mystery to the majority of us. You know, you hear these crimes that happen, the terrible things that people do to each other, and it is like repulsive to think that people do these things on a daily basis, unfortunately. And I think there is this drive to understand why. That it's not necessarily just like we want to be entertained by awful things, but on a psychological level. Mysteries and thrillers, like they put us in those mindsets to try to understand a little bit more about this darkest subsection of society and why do they do these things? What pushes a person to that point? Are people just born capable of doing these things? I mean, that's been such a debate, I think, for decades, if not centuries, of as far as like, you know, clinical research on topics like that. I'm sure it's been a question since the beginning of time of what makes people do terrible things to each other. But
well, it's Cain and Abel.
Yeah, exactly.
For example.
Exactly.
And all the Greek gods. It's like you go back to every mythology and that's at the heart of it.
So many of them. Yeah, we did a book about Greek myths last year in my class, and a lot of the kids were just like, these guys are awful. Yeah, it's not quite what we'd expect today.
No. There should be trigger warnings all over the place.
No kidding.
Also Norse mythology. Anyway.
We get into some of the myths, and it's really, you're like, wow, okay, it's not just us in current day that's kind of messed up. This has been a long-standing thing.
Yeah, it's baked in. It's a feature. It's not a bug.
Absolutely. Well, I wanted to ask you, because this is a new genre for you. So how did you approach putting together a mystery? The first time I wrote a mystery, it was like, okay, I'm going to write a mystery, and I'm not an outliner. I just get an idea and I go for it and I make a mess of it, and then I have to go back and fix it. And if you take that approach with mystery, you really make a lot of messes, and then you have a lot of stuff to fix when you go back to revise. So what was your process for approaching a mystery like this?
Well, I knew who did it. And so the first draft was just figuring out how to tell that without, to put all the clues in a way that would keep the reader guessing without giving it away, because I guess that's the game. And also to create an interesting sort of B storyline and a couple of red herrings and have those dovetail. So because I mean, another thing about a detective novel is that everyone is a potential murderer, which is a really interesting way of looking at everyone you talk to. You know, everyone's a suspect. So for me, it was and I'm not an outliner either. Someone just said on a panel I was on at the Tucson Festival of the Book that she's not a plotter, she's a pantser. So I'm a pantser. But it's writing by the seat of your pants, sort of. I feel like it's an improvisational sort of character-driven way of writing that is it's the only way that I stay interested in a book I'm working on. So to stay interested in this one, it was the mystery for me was how I got from point A to point B, how I got from her taking the case to her figuring out who did it. Or in this case, having that solution thrust upon her because she puts herself in the way of danger in order to find out. So I was improvising the entire time, just sort of riffing and having fun and seeing who was in Rose's life and who Joe needed to talk to and what other leads. Because it's interesting, you know, you have to follow leads as a detective. And it's not unlike being a novelist in a lot of ways. You talk to people, you observe, you get insights. I had fun. And it's a unique kind of fun that I've never had writing a book before. And I think I did it pretty much like you did. That rang a lot of bells when you were describing your process.
Well, and how is that, I guess, different from the previous books that you've written? Even not being an outliner, just generally, it sounds like this was a different, just overall experience than some of your other works.
It was because I was writing in a genre that I know and love in my bones. And with my other books, I feel like I was making it up, even though I always had a touchstone novel that I was using as a sort of guidepost or inspiration. All of my books have that, all my literary books. And I've also written 2 food memoirs, but those 2, I felt like I was making up the structure as I went, and I was writing in a genre, but I'm writing in a genre that doesn't have any hard and fast rules. And so this is the first time, and this is the first book where I felt the ancestors on my head sitting on me or showing me the way or whatever, the ancestors being all the great writers of detective series that I've inhaled. And understanding that there are rules and you can break them. Sarah Gran sure does. And she's the most inventive mystery writer going right now, I think. But in order to break them, you have to have mastered them. And this was my first one. So I felt like I wanted to place this in a kind of Southwest noir, hard-boiled female detective place, which Tucson is, perfect for. And so for me, it was all light and shadows and sort of dialogue. And I thought a lot about Raymond Chandler, too. And the thing I love about Chandler is it's this sort of smoke and mirrors plot structure. At the end of his books, I'm not really sure what happened. His books are like a dream. They're like you're dreaming your way through LA, seamy underworld, and you're sort of caught up in this mysterious, like shadowy, psychological, world of whispering and innuendo and wisecracking. And I don't know how he does it. I find it so compelling, and yet at the end, I'm left with this impression instead of a really clear idea of, oh, this is what happened. And maybe it's just that I was drinking whiskey while I was reading him, but I feel like it's very artful what he does. And so I kind of felt some of that. Like I wanted a sense of place more than anything else. I wanted you to feel what Tucson is like and what these people are like, more than I wanted it to feel like a plotted, tight sort of mystery, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I actually wanted to bring up and talk about the location because that's something maybe just as a reader, like you don't always necessarily think about. Like, I want a mystery set in this specific type of setting. But for most mysteries, setting plays a huge role in what type of mystery it is, how it's going to be solved, who's going to be involved in it. A lot of small town mysteries, you either get like the kind of bumbling police with the amateur detective, or in the city, it's more hard boiled, sometimes more noir. So it really has a big impact. And in this story, the locations that you go to, you have a couple of key locations, but Delphi being a home base.
Mm-hmm.
And this is kind of out of the way. It's a very unique little community, and that brings a lot to the overall mystery as far as the plot, how the mystery has to be approached, who the characters are that are involved in it, and just how everything comes together really hinges on this location. And so I wanted to ask you about that, just how you went about choosing where the book was going to go in terms of the story and following the leads, and then and how much of that is based off of reality and where you took some artistic license in developing your settings.
Well, I grew up in 70s Arizona Bohemia. So she grew up in an artist colony in the desert, and it's an old dude ranch that a lot of baby boomers bought in the 70s and fixed up to be artist studios, and they live sort of communally, and they've been there ever since, aging in place, side by side. That is taken directly from my own life, and places like that I know in Arizona really well and have had like an immersion in, not just growing up, but also in recent years. I really, I really wanted to write about a certain kind of, I mean, I don't think this is the Arizona that people think of when they think of Arizona. They don't think of like, artist colonies in the desert, or maybe they do, but I do because it's sort of how I was raised. I thought that the possibilities for a detective novel setting or a murder, I really like closed spaces, the most famous one being the Orient Express, and a sort of loose, this is more loose and more porous, but it is, you're right, it's like a contained community. It also borrows from a lot of Agatha Christie, which is, the small town and with a limited number of people. And also Louise Penny does this really well, combined with the urban, hard-boiled, Santa Barbara of Sue Grafton or LA of Raymond Chandler. So there's Tucson, which is an hour south where she has to go also to solve the crime. And I kind of liked her going back and forth almost between two different types of detective work.
It really kind of helped the reader, I think, as far as my experience of reading, of having those changes of pace. Because the artist colony, it can be really an intense location with the closeness of the people, and there's just a lot in that little space. And to get that break to kind of go out and investigate other areas, I thought was really great for the pacing overall, and to just give the reader that moment to step back and be like, okay, let's think about this over here, and then we come back. So I really enjoyed the pacing of the story and the different locations overall, and just how interrelated setting was to the overall story and just the development of the characters. It added a lot to the story.
I'm glad you brought that up because it made it really fun to write. When I could feel things coming to a standstill in Delphi, I just sent Jo back down to Tucson because there were people down there she had to talk to. So it kept me really interested in, in describing the drive and sort of the whole idea of that entire valley and that entire place, because it is a really unique kind of, I don't know if you've been north of Tucson to those towns up there, but they're really conducive to base a mystery on. I'm planning to focus on Tucson going forward, which is also fun. And there are a lot of towns south of Tucson, too, that I want to send her to. The whole area in southern Arizona is just, it's ripe for all kinds of shenanigans.
I haven't spent a lot of time there, but I've read several series set there in over the last couple of years, and it does seem like a really fascinating place with a lot to work with creatively.
Yeah, so true. Yeah, I feel like I won't get to the bottom of it, and there's room for lots of series set there.
Well, I look forward to them. And I looked up at the clock, and we're already almost out of time.
That was fun.
Well, I'm so glad we got the chance to talk. And I did want to remind our listeners before we start to wrap up that the book is called The Arizona Triangle, and that's by Sydney Graves. And you can also check out Kate Christensen's other works as well. I foresee maybe having you back on for your next book in the future. I think that would be great.
That would be a pleasure. I would love that.
Absolutely. Tell our listeners, where can they find you and the book, and just keep up to date on what you're doing? Because it sounds like you have more in the works and we have a lot to look forward to.
Well, my website is katechristensen.net, and I'm on Instagram as katechristensen100. I don't post very much on social media, so my website is probably the best place to go. And I have a YA book coming out, it's a novel, coming out with Hyperion in October. It's called The Sacred and the Divine. And I have a new literary novel that is just about to go into production. It's called Good Company. And those are both under my name, Kate Christensen. And the second Jo Balin novel is in the works, and it's called Saguaro City.
All right. Well, all kinds of things to keep an eye out for. That's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today. I really appreciated it, and this was a great conversation.
Thank you so much for this conversation. And until next time.